I was actually going over your website last night, and my concern is the structure of suppressing votes down in Florida.
And many other states, unfortunately.
Right. But it took me for a loop because of the certain situations that's happened in the past. We had George Bush's brother down there.
Yeah.
Then we had the Skittles incident, and it continues. Yet we know about this, and no one of name or structure has stepped out and talked about this ongoing racism. Why is that happening?
Why is it happening? I don't think people like to talk about racism.
But we should. It's an everyday occurrence.
I think we have to force that discussion, frankly. And there's no question when you look at the Republican initiatives in so many states to change the methods of registration, that this is categorically about denying votes to lower income citizens, Latinos, African Americans, and others. And there's really no defense for it. I mean, the courts are moving slowly, and you know, the irony to me is that most of the states are getting away with this activity. It's only where we have states still under civil rights mandates on the voting protection laws that go back to the 60s that they're forced to have reviews in Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, places like that. In Wisconsin, and you know, some of the Midwestern states, you can believe the level of voter suppression that's going on now. It's like reinstituting the poll tax. You have to have voter IDs. Well, they lost a court case saying they had to fund it, but if someone didn't have the money for the voter ID, the state of Wisconsin has to fund that voter ID. Well, then they tried to say they'll only fund it if you make a written request for it. Well, you know, you're trying to get how many, you know, angels or what, how many rich men through the eye of a needle to get to heaven. You're trying to get all these folks to try to get to be registered, to go through all those changes. You know that's not going to happen. So yeah, I think we need to be able to talk about it very expressly. The tragedy, I think, is that most of those votes are votes for people like President Obama or the Democratic you know, candidates, and this is all partisan politics. This is not just about voter registration.
I think the Republicans know that, and I also think that we're undereducated in that area. And again, no one's addressing that area. It seems as though every time we have a leader that steps out and attacks that area, they're assassinated.
Well, it used to be worse than it is now. But
I find it hard to believe. I honestly do. I honestly do. When you can still drag a man behind a pickup truck in Texas, when you can, you know, shoot a young kid at 17 down in Florida, when you can shoot another young man through a cop car window in California, it's not, and you can call the leader of the free world a liar in public session. I don't see it getting better.
well, we all have some obligations to make it better, don't we?
Yeah, we do. But it's kind of hard to do when the forces that control everything with the 1%ers, you know, really continue to keep us disorganized.
But that increases the weight of obligation on all of us to act, even in small ways. Danny was just telling, Dr. Russell was just telling me that some of you were assigned to read my blog in preparation for this. And, you know, I just spent, you know, as citizens, we have this obligation to do jury service. And I found as I sat through jury service on criminal court trials in New Orleans, and yeah, that's in the South, became harder and harder to believe if I were selected again that there was any way that even if you were convinced somebody was guilty, that you could actually vote to a verdict on the charge that the prosecutor was asking. Because we now have mandatory sentencing in Louisiana. We have no rehabilitation program. We have a privatized, largely privatized prison system, so it actually is financially an incentive for most county, or most parish sheriffs to keep you in jail. And we have a governor who's trying to get to be, you know, your Governor Romney's vice presidential candidate, who wouldn't give you a parole if you had a, you know, gun and a ski mask on you. And so, and some of the charges are ridiculous. 20 years for, you know, one rock of cocaine, and that's all of a sudden distribution. I mean, I'm not saying that's right, I'm not saying it's good for our communities, but this is a 30-year drug war. We've lost this war, and yet we're still, you know, holding people in prisons, you know, stacked like cordwood. Well, I'm not sure, and I started telling him in the voir dire, you know what, I'm glad to be on the jury, and if he's guilty, I will vote for some charge, but it won't be the charge you're asking for. I'm not going to do that. There's no discretion in the judges. If you think they should have gotten a couple of years, vote for a charge that gives you a couple of years. I'm not going to vote for a 20-year charge for a 20-year-old kid who made a mistake. I mean, so, but what are we supposed to do? You can't do nothing. I see your hand.
Yeah,
On to the next question, or on to whatever you want to do.
No, I'm actually going to comment on that
Okay.
part of your blog because I found it very interesting as well. And I know that you, in your interview, made it very clear that you, what you just said, that you know, you didn't.
I'm not their guy, yeah.
Right. And unfortunately, you were let go times because of that. But you have also made it known to the other jurors, you know, your stance. Is there anything else that has gone within that community to try to raise more awareness in that regards, or to gain any more attention to see if there's anything else that can be done?
This actually is fascinating because it really goes to the first brother's point about what are our obligations even individually to act collectively about injustice when we see it. Clearly, as an organizer, I believe in mass movements. I believe in getting hundreds of thousands of people together and making those changes in the largest kind of campaigns you can. But at the same time, if you look at how social change really happens, it also starts with, you know, a dozen of us like we are in this room deciding we're not going to say yes, we're going to say different, or here's what we believe, or here's what we stand. And even in that small little, you know, incident of the jury, I mean, it was fascinating to me how many people were quickly saying, yeah, they felt the same way. They couldn't really convict it. I mean, look, New Orleans is not the bright shining light here in terms of criminal justice. And we just had police that were convicted of killing people on the bridge after Katrina who are going to prison for 20 years themselves, and that's for people dying, not for no one bullet in a gun or one this or one that. So to believe that somehow you should ever convict anybody in New Orleans right today in the wake of that decision based on 100% police testimony, I'm not saying the police are all bad, I'm not saying there aren't some good people that are police, I'm not saying some of them, but you gotta have something more than just 5 policemen, because that's what we just watched on the Danziger Bridge where people were killed running from Katrina. Yeah, it was a crazy time, but you didn't get that badge and that gun to be just, you know, pop shooting out there. What's the difference between that and somebody on a drive-by killing a 3-year-old by mistake? It's death is death, and there's nothing right about it. And so you got to have more if you're going to be on a jury and convict. Well, so yeah, not everybody believes that, but if somebody's willing to speak up, a lot of those things where we're thinking about it, this is how change happens. We're thinking about it, but we think maybe it's only us, and this is the heart of the organizing process. When you find out that what you were thinking turns out to be what's shared with other people, when a personal issue becomes a political concern, and it's what C. Wright Mills defined as the whole notion of dialectics in politics. When a personal issue becomes a public issue. And that's where it starts. Us saying no, us saying yes, us saying, hey, what do you think? And sure enough, I mean, even that little bitty teeny, you know, jury example, people started standing together. That doesn't mean all of a sudden they're going to, but you can imagine if you're, you know, romantic like I am, that if enough people in jury started talking this way, next thing you know, they are going to have to come up with some different program because you're not going to be able to convict people. You have one hung jury after another. But these are, I think where it forces us to go is start thinking of all of us as social activists, as organizers, as people who are able to make change.
This is